All right, so let's see. Housekeeping. The bathroom is wherever it is in your house. Can't help you with that. The food is also on you this time. Sorry about that. Have not baked any goodies nor made any soup.
Nor made a trip to Iggy's.
Made a trip to Iggy's for cheese, but it is our first virtual soup supper, otherwise our 18th soup supper. Maybe it's our first virtual soupless supper. I don't know. But we have Sika here with us today. And Sika, well, actually, maybe this is a question for Jean. Where was Sika in the intern order for Climable?
Sika was #1. So the semester, we had Sika and Nate Mendez together. And so nothing against Nate, but I'll say, Sika, you're a #1 intern. First.
All right.
Before you, so you're it.
That's exciting.
I don't think I knew that.
So we were hoping, Sika, that you could tell us a little bit about your journey from like Climable to where you are now. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and hopefully we'll be sharing this on the YouTube.
Oh, cool. Oh, I didn't even know. Okay.
That's okay.
So I entered Climable in the fall of 2016. I think the summer before, I was studying abroad in London, and I was a chemical engineering major. And at that time, I think I had a very technical perspective on environmental policy and advocacy. I don't even think I was thinking about advocacy, but after my study abroad experience, I realized that I wanted to understand the bigger picture when it comes to environmental policy. So I started thinking about internships because the chemical engineering major is just really technical. There was no kind of perspective on stuff outside of the math side of things. So I found out about Mass CEC. I think my sister had interned as well through Mass CEC after her senior year. So she was the one who mentioned it to me initially. And then I found Climable, and then I interviewed, and I really loved Jeannie off the bat. So I got really excited about it. And so during that fall, I think primarily we were trying to put together a list of initial contacts to reach out to for fundraising purposes. So Nate was helping out with actually putting together grant applications, and I was trying to put together a list of just people that we could reach out to. And I think in that stage, we were still fleshing out what Climable's mission could actually look like in terms of partnerships on the ground and projects that we could kind of get involved in. And yeah, so that was the fall. And during that time, I was also applying to grad programs. And I think just interning at Climable and getting exposure to Synapse as well, it really opened my eyes to how intentional you can be with the people you work with when it comes to addressing environmental pollution issues. Before that, I was like, oh, I'm going to apply to a pharmaceutical firm or an oil and gas company. I knew about climate change, but I didn't really think about it. So working there really opened my eyes. And so once I got to MIT in the fall, of 2017. So at MIT, my master's was in technology and policy. So once I got there in the fall, I really knew what I wanted my master's experience to look like. So I think my housemate is doing something. I'm gonna turn on my headphones. Yeah. Can folks hear me? Great, okay. So once I got to MIT, I really knew what I wanted from that grad experience in terms of the projects that I wanted to work on. And the summer prior to MIT, I'd interned at Synapse and kind of at Climable at the same time. And so then again, I was introduced now to environmental consulting. And I remember Bruce mentioning that Synapse only works with companies that they feel like are committed to, advancing environmental goals or care about climate change. And that just really struck me. And so fast forward to 2 years later, once I finished or was finishing up my master's, I knew that wherever I went next, I just wanted to be intentional with the kind of companies I applied to. So in my graduate research, I'd come across the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'd read a lot of like their reports, and I was like, oh my gosh, it'd be a dream if I could work there. And I'd been interviewing at different places, but I'd never really loved any place. And then a position opened up at the lab in international and domestic energy transitions, and felt like it was almost like a 4 or 5 month process. But then I landed at the lab, and I don't even think I'd heard of Colorado. So I'm originally from Ghana, so I hadn't heard of Colorado prior to that. And yeah, kind of in my interview process, just really loved the team that I would be working with. And so I've been here since August of last year. And my work is in 2 main buckets. So there's the domestic work, which is techno-economic analysis. So we help different sites out with figuring out how to size renewable energy for their properties. So it can be like we working with an airport, or the US citizens work with like military bases to figure out how to site renewable energy that meets the building's energy load. And we can expand it to considering like heating loads and any other utilities on the property. And then internationally, which is the stuff I was really excited about, is my group works a lot in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we provide technical assistance in whatever capacity is needed. So for example, in the Philippines, maybe they want to develop a model that helps them dispatch electricity more efficiently. We can provide any kind of assistance that they might need. So that might be sending modelers there, kind of allowing the experts to visit NREL for a month and then sit with us, or helping them with policy planning, whatever they need, we assist. And those kind of projects are mainly funded by USAID. So those are the 2 main buckets. And so I do core research, and then also project management. The project management is more for the international projects. And
You have a favorite?
Favorite projects? Oh, like between research and project management, or just favorite project?
Either.
I think the project management is really new to me, so it's exciting in that aspect that I'm learning a new skill. But on the actual research side of things, we just started a project on floating solar. And I didn't even know that was a thing before. So we're trying to figure out barriers to deployment of floating solar in Southeast Asia, because a number of countries have land constraints and are really dependent on coal and natural gas that they're trying to transition. And yeah. So I guess the last thing I'll add is, looking back, like Climable really was it was pivotal in figuring out my path, and just having like Jeannie and just others in Synapse as well to just provide that advice and mentorship. I probably wouldn't be here without seeing people doing the kind of work that was interesting to me, but I hadn't seen anyone do it prior to that, prior to starting at Climable. Yeah.
That's so nice to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's amazing what you're doing. And anyway, so thank you for saying all that. And I just wanted to say hi to the others who've joined. Hi, Isabel. Hi, Julia. And anyway, I'll just turn it back over to Jen.
Back over. Ooh. Am I back on? I think I'm back on. I hit 2 buttons at once. I'm not sure what happened. So yeah, that is very cool, very fascinating. Actually, very curious about the floating solar. But I guess this is the point where we can open it up to questions, because recognize that a lot of people have been on the screen for a while today, but still wanted to have this space where people can join and see faces that they haven't seen in a little bit and say hi, and then learn about your work, Sika. So does anyone have any questions? Just unmute yourselves, I guess.
I'll go. Hi.
Hey.
So my name is Cecilia. I'm a current undergraduate at Northeastern University, and I am currently interning with Climable. And I was just curious, you said you were really interested in international projects. I was wondering if you could speak a little more about that, like what kind of projects specifically, and like what you're working on.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I guess my interest in international projects comes from the fact that I am from Ghana. So, if long term, I'm hoping to move back home. So, if once I started working on projects and I've had more choice about what projects I work on, I just always want to see how the solutions that we are working on, whether it's in the lab or another company, how that translates to an international context. So initially it was sub-Saharan Africa. When I was in grad school, my thesis focused on electricity planning in Ghana. And now at the lab, some of the projects that we're working on in that region are around mini grids and modeling battery systems for mini grids. But I also realized that even though the Southeast Asia context is really different, it's very similar in some ways. So that has also made me interested in kind of the energy solutions that people are developing for that context as well. But my interest primarily comes from, I'm from Ghana, I want to move back home at some point, and I've just always been interested in the energy access questions in Ghana and like sub-Saharan Africa.
I have kind of like a slightly related question, I guess. So a term that was new to me when I started at Climable was environmental justice. Mm-hmm. And the reason this comes to mind right now is because you're talking about access to energy and equity and all these questions. And I was just actually messaging with Alex and Cecilia about this like crazy thing that happened in Chicago, where a smokestack was from a decommissioned coal plant was supposed to be demolished, and it didn't work out as planned, so it created this crazy toxic haze over this EJ neighborhood in Chicago. And I was like, holy cow. To what extent has work, I mean, I'm assuming, maybe I should have started with this, that you talked about environmental justice or energy democracy when you were at Climable, maybe? To what extent has that appeared as a recurring theme in your grad school work or at NREL?
So I think in my grad school work, it didn't, like environmental justice wasn't explicitly part of the program or curriculum. It felt like you had to be interested in that prior to the program or kind of been exposed to that through some other course. And so for me, the reason I've not always been interested in environmental justice or even known about it, but I took a class in the fall of 2016 as well when I was interning at Climable, an environmental policy class, and that kind of exposed me to just the environmental justice aspect of things. And so right now at NREL, I think what we try to do is really centering people in the solutions that we try to develop. So that means trying to engage with stakeholders on the ground, which usually takes longer, but we believe is core to finding an effective solution. And at NREL, again, it's not explicit, but we really have people, whether it's in my group or a larger group that I work with, that really think equity is central to any of the solutions that we come up with. And so one piece of that is in our resilience work. So there's just a growing body of resilience work that kind of has maybe a gender lens to it in addition to the energy solutions lens. And so some of that gender energy nexus of considerations, we've done some of that work in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, it doesn't always get the funding, sadly, but I think a lot of us in this space are really trying to think about what does it tangibly look like to center environmental justice in what we're doing. And not really like tacking it on after you finish the whole project and you're like, oh, let's just note this. Yeah.
That's actually a little refreshing, and I wasn't expecting you to have that much involvement, or NREL to have that much, I don't know what the word is, exposure, or giving it that much thought. So yeah.
Priority.
Your priority, thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Jeannie, you were going to ask a question about re-opt, I thought.
Oh, yeah. So, Sika, when we talked a little while ago, you said that you were doing some re-opt work. And re-opt is a model. I'm pretty sure people at Synapse are at least familiar with it. I don't know, Erin, if you've heard of people at Synapse doing projects with re-opt lately, but anyway, I think it sounds like a very interesting tool, and I wonder if you can maybe tell the group what re-opt can do, who's it available to, when might Synapse or others of us want to, certainly Climable, want to employ it, and how could we? A lot of questions.
So yeah, the domestic work I do is using re-opt, and re-opt is just a techno-economic analysis tool that kind of allows a user to put in certain, whether it's energy usage inputs and just information about a specific site. And then the model is able to optimize to give you a size of how much PV you need, how much storage you need, how much would it cost, the MPV, so what are the monetary benefits you would see from that. And given certain constraints, maybe it's like policies and policies and incentives for a specific location, state. So that's the high level. So an example of a project that I'm working on is you might have, I'm going to try and be as vague as possible. So maybe a school or a town wants to be energy resilient. They've seen that some of its constituents have a very high energy burden. So they're spending a disproportionate amount of their income on their energy utility bills. And so with re-opt, we can say maybe for this building, and then kind of extrapolate it to a town, this is how much PV you can build, and this is how much you would save, yes, for the town, but then for the average kind of resident, this is how much they would save on the utility bills. So that's an example of a project that I worked on. And as for availability, the re-opt team actually released an open source version early this year. So I think it's might be nrel.gov/re-opt maybe. But if you put in re-opt in Google, it should come up, and there is an open source version, and you have access to most of the re-opt capabilities. And there's also an API. So the API allows those who do have more of that programming background to tailor re-opt to their specific research needs. So it's available to everyone at this point. And we also have a help service. So if you run re-opt online and run into any issues and reach out to the help team, we're able to kind of address the questions, bugs, and all the other things that might come up in the process.
So it's more than just a solar optimization tool, right? Is it applicable to microgrids?
It is. It's actually, the core of it is really for those kind of site-specific microgrid projects. And so it doesn't really scale well to front-of-the-meter applications. So re-opt is a behind-the-meter. So for your home, for your kind of office, those kind of optimization questions.
Who built Reopt?
So it was developed in-house by an NREL team.
Okay, so that was what I was going to ask. It sounded like it was in-house.
Yes, it's an in-house model.
Okay.
And yeah, and because NREL is a national lab, most of the models it develops in-house are eventually kind of made open access and available to everyone.
Did you help with anything like that? Is that a team that you work on, or did you just use something else that team would have developed?
So I'm on the analysis side of the Reopt team now. So my primary group is international kind of project focused. But then when I interviewed, I was asked, what kind of projects would you want to work on? And I said modeling. And then they said, which kind of tools would you want to work on? And I said Reopt. And my boss made that happen. She's amazing, by the way. So the team, kind of the Reopt team, I think has been putting together the tool for about a decade. And they just released the open access version last year.
Have you used Implan?
No.
Okay. I was wondering. Well, cool.
What does Implan do?
It's an economic, I don't actually know a ton about it, but I know it's economic modeling. It's not.
Okay.
But I was wondering, I don't know how they do it. You might know. I'm not sure. Her camera went away.
I'm muted. It's just like the Brady Bunch. She just changed location to where she is on the screen. Oh, you good, Jeannie?
I think so.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with my technical something or other at home, so I had to switch to my phone, but I think I'm good. I'm going to go to, I don't know, I'll just go right here.
Okay.
There we go.
So I had something you were talking about when you're talking about the NPV that you use Reopt for. Is there anything in there that has factored in any type of value of resilience? That's something we talk about all the time. Looking at Cecilia, because that's something she's working on right now. But curious to see if and to what extent you guys, how you think about that.
So we do kind of consider resilience as well. So if you go to the Reopt site, there's 2 optimization options. So the first is optimizing for cost, and then the second is optimizing for resiliency. And so you can kind of run a scenario where maybe this building is an emergency shelter, and so you have to input an expectation of, oh, we expect power to go out for 3 hours, 1 hour during this year. And Reopt will optimize the system to kind of size PV and storage to make sure that you can meet that load when power cuts out. So we do, the Reopt team does quite a bit of analysis of resilience. And that is, I guess it's very important in the context of the military bases, just in general, or any kind of critical infrastructure, whether it's a hospital or, yeah.
I would assume even in like big, well, because we're in Cambridge, right? All the like biomedical buildings with like sensitive tests that have to maintain a certain temperature or something, that would be super important to them too.
Yes, yeah.
Like all the fridges that cannot defrost, you know? Yeah, same thing with universities, which is also Boston.
Also, we have the Junior Mint Factory, and that's like pretty critical in my mind.
Yeah, so kind of any site, and yeah, kind of any site that you're interested in how much is this going to cost for us resilience-wise, you can do that optimization. And then Reopt can also provide kind of a comparison of, if we optimize for cost versus if we optimize for resilience, this is how much. This is the difference in how much money you would need to put into that and how oversized your system would be. So sometimes, because we have a diesel generator option in Reopt, and that is not environmentally friendly, but sometimes it does come out that for some sites, it's much cheaper to have a diesel generator to meet that 1 hour of load, or a couple hours of load you expect the site to lose, than to kind of oversize your battery system by 2 to 3 times just to meet that hour. And then the site needs to kind of make the decision of
how much money they want to invest. Yeah. What would you say are, sorry guys, now I'm just monopolizing with my nerdy questions, but what would you say are is like a comparable tool to Reopt, or is there one?
Not to my knowledge, but then again, I'm very new to this kind of space. But I would say that a lot of the tools that NREL develops, and if we have in mind developing tools that tools are developed for a gap that has been identified. So most of the time, there isn't maybe a comparable open access tool. And so that's something that's always really important, just making sure. So NREL develops a lot of tools, and many companies probably have a Reopt comparable tool, but you might need to pay for it.
Okay. Great. Any other questions, guys, or should we?
I was really curious about floating solar because I hadn't heard of that before. And I was wondering, like you said you were working on projects in Southeast Asia, and I was wondering if there's anywhere else in the world that that's working on that, and if you could just talk a little bit about the work you're doing.
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing I've learned about floating solar is that there has been a lot of interest, but in regions in the world that don't have land constraints, it doesn't really work out economics-wise, supposedly. So floating solar has grown a lot in mostly Asia. China is the leader now because of those land constraints, but land-based PV is almost always cheaper than floating solar. And so in terms to, I think that second part of your question was why Southeast Asia floating solar. It's just because you have countries like Thailand, Philippines, and others that are made up of multiple island systems. So they have thousands of islands, and they need to meet the load on that. And they also have huge hydro potential, so they have a lot of reservoir dams. And so for us, in thinking about floating solar, we're thinking about the potential for it to be paired with hydro, especially because you have all these reservoirs that you can kind of just put the floating solar on it. And if you already have an operating hydropower dam, kind of the technical or the more theoretical work right now is kind of looking at whether you can pair the floating solar with that. So you would save money on transmission and other technical costs because you're not building out any new, any of that additional infrastructure. And the kind of a big part of the hybridization value proposition is if you paired solar with hydro, you could make solar dispatchable because then the hydro would help smooth out those solar unpredictabilities. And then on the flip side, some of these countries in Southeast Asia are especially interested in floating solar because the hydro resources tend to dip during the dry season. And if you're really dependent on hydro, then that can cause rolling blackouts. So if you could size a floating solar system to help meet some of that lost generation during the dry season, that's also enough a potential. That's why they're also probably really interested in floating solar.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, I bet the solar generation is higher during the dry season and lower during the rainy season, with clouds and stuff. I mean, have you found that to be true? Or
so there actually hasn't been a lot of data coming out from plants that are in actual operation.
Oh, okay.
And so that's also kind of one of the goals of this project is to kind of bring together all the body of knowledge that has been done, all the studies and kind of all the conclusions from the that have been done, because it feels like an emerging field. It really grew really quickly, but there hasn't been a lot of data from plant and operations. So to your question of, oh, is there more solar production during the dry season?
No.
To my knowledge, we don't know. Yeah.
Fair. I have a question that's unrelated to your work, Sika, and it's kind of a question for everyone because Sonia is trying to get on this call, but instead of saying she has to download Zoom, it's saying she has to download Ring Central. Did everyone have that situation?
Yes.
Okay, so you did download Ring
Yeah,
Central.
you need like a Ring Central plugin. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll let her know. Thanks.
So I think I'm actually just gonna wrap up the recording portion of this so that we have something packaged for YouTube that we can share with whoever wants to watch it. I've had a couple people write in saying, will this be available afterwards because I can't make it. So I'm gonna hit stop recording right now.